When producer Samuel Goldwyn bought the film rights to Guys and Dolls in December 1953, he thought he had a guaranteed hit. The Broadway musical had already won awards and packed theaters for over 200 performances. Goldwyn paid a record-breaking $1 million for the rights, hoping to turn it into a joyful, colorful film that would fill cinemas across America. But before the cameras even rolled, one decision changed everything. He cast Marlon Brando as Sky Masterson, a slick gambler who wins over a strict missionary, Sarah Brown. That single choice infuriated Frank Sinatra. Sinatra had wanted that role for years. He was already a big star with an Oscar, countless hit songs, and sold-out shows in Las Vegas. He begged Goldwyn to give him the part, even offering to take less money. Sinatra believed Sky was perfect for him. Charming, confident, and smooth-talking. Instead, Goldwyn gave him the smaller role of Nathan Detroit, another gambler. Sinatra smiled in public, but was deeply angry behind the scenes. Brando, fresh from his Oscar win for On the Waterfront, had never sung a note on screen before. Sinatra thought it was a joke. To him, it felt like Hollywood had handed the crown to a newcomer who didn't even respect musicals. From that moment, a quiet war began that would soon explode into one of Hollywood's most famous feuds. The tension between Brando and Sinatra went far beyond casting. They were two completely different kinds of men. Sinatra came from the world of old Hollywood, fast, confident, and professional. He liked to finish a scene in one take, and hated wasting time. He was used to being adored, used to being in control. Brando, on the other hand, was part of a new generation of method actors. He believed in living every moment of the role, repeating scenes again and again until he felt the emotion was perfect. To Sinatra, this was madness. To Brando, Sinatra's one-take habit looked lazy. When filming began in March 1955, the difference between them was like fire and ice. Sinatra mocked Brando, calling him mumbles because of his quiet, natural way of speaking. Brando fought back with sly jokes and subtle pranks. The crew could feel the tension every day. Sometimes, Sinatra would storm off set when Brando demanded too many Other times, Brando would purposely delay scenes just to see Sinatra's temper rise. Even the director, Joseph Mankiewicz, had to schedule their scenes separately to stop fights from breaking out. By the time they filmed the musical numbers, the two stars could barely look at each other. What had started as professional jealousy was quickly becoming personal hate. Among all the drama on set, one scene became legendary, the cheesecake scene. In this quiet moment in Guys and Dolls, Sinatra's character, Nathan Detroit, eats cheesecake while talking to Brando's character, Sky Masterson. On camera, it looks simple, calm, and funny. But behind the scenes, it became a nightmare. Everyone knew Sinatra hated cheesecake. He couldn't stand its rich, heavy texture. Brando knew this and decided to use it for revenge. During filming, after one perfect take, Brando began purposely messing up his lines. Each mistake meant another retake. And every retake meant another slice of cheesecake for Sinatra. First one slice, then two, then three. By the eighth take, Sinatra had eaten nearly 8 full slices, more than 4 pounds of cheesecake. His face turned pale, his hands trembled, and he was visibly sick. Crew members offered him water, but the cameras kept rolling. When Brando faked another mistake, Sinatra snapped. He slammed his fork into the table, threw his plate to the floor, and shouted, "How much cheesecake do you think I can eat?" The room went silent. That outburst wasn't acting, it was pure frustration. Filming stopped for the day, costing the studio thousands of dollars. The next morning, they redid the scene in a single take, but everyone knew the damage was done. The cheesecake revenge became the most talked about story in Hollywood that year, and the moment that proved how toxic the feud had become. After the cheesecake incident, the feud turned into open warfare. Sinatra began spreading stories about Brando to the press, saying he couldn't sing and didn't belong in musicals. He called him the world's worst singer and laughed at his slow, serious style. Brando didn't hold back either. He told reporters that working with Sinatra was like acting next to a loaded gun. The crew watched in disbelief as the two biggest stars in the world tried to destroy each other. Sinatra started showing up late, or sometimes not at all, especially when scenes involved Brando. Brando, in return, would take hours to finish even the smallest scene, just to push Sinatra's patience. On one day, Sinatra left the set before 6 p.m. because he refused to work overtime, while Brando stayed late to redo his scenes. The constant delays cost the studio thousands of dollars each week. Director Mankiewicz had to film close-ups of each actor separately and then splice them together later, so they wouldn't have to stand in the same room. By this point, their arguments weren't about art anymore, they were about pride. Sinatra believed he was being disrespected, while Brando thought he was being bullied by an arrogant singer. Every line they delivered came with a hidden insult. What the audience saw as light-hearted comedy was, behind the camera, a battle between two egos who couldn't coexist. The tension between the two stars affected everything around them. Sets went over budget, shooting schedules were pushed back, and crew members were forced to take sides. Some supported Sinatra, who treated filming like a job that should be done fast and clean. Others sided with Brando, who believed in slow emotional perfection. The film's production cost kept climbing, reaching more than $5.5 million, an enormous sum in 1955. Even the musical numbers became a struggle. Brando needed over 200 takes to record his songs because his voice wasn't strong enough. Critics later said he sounded colorless, and even composer Frank Sinatra wasn't happy with his singing. Meanwhile, Sinatra delivered his musical scenes flawlessly in just 1 or 2 takes, but that only made the tension worse. The studio had to bring in script rewrites, new songs, and extra editing just to make both stars look good. At one point, Sinatra even got a special new song, Adelaide, written just for him to keep him satisfied. The pressure on everyone was enormous. By mid-1955, the feud had become the talk of Hollywood, with journalists publishing rumors almost daily. Yet, when the cameras rolled, the magic somehow still worked. On screen, Guys and Dolls looked like a charming musical full of humor and color. Off-screen, it was a war zone fueled by pride, jealousy, and exhaustion. Despite all the chaos, Guys and Dolls turned out to be a massive hit. When it premiered on November 3, 1955, it drew huge crowds and glowing reviews. The movie earned over $9 million in the United States and another $11 million worldwide, an impressive success for its time. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and won a Golden Globe for Best Musical. Critics praised Sinatra's performance as Nathan Detroit, saying he brought humor and warmth to the role. Brando's singing was criticized, but many admired his charm and intensity. However, behind the smiles on premiere night, the two stars were still bitter enemies. Sinatra never forgave Brando for taking the role he wanted, and Brando never forgot the humiliation of being mocked as Mumbles. In later years, their rivalry spilled into public interviews. Brando joked that Sinatra was jealous of his Oscars, while Sinatra mocked Brando's acting style, calling him a phony who hides behind mumbling. Even decades later, they continued to trade insults. Sinatra banned Brando from his famous Rat Pack events, and Brando got back at him by leaking stories about Sinatra's mob connections. Their feud had outlived the movie itself, turning into a legend that defined both of their careers. The rivalry between Sinatra and Brando didn't end with Guys and Dolls. It followed them for the rest of their lives and shaped their reputations in Hollywood. Some stories suggest that Brando got revenge years later when he won the role of Vito Corleone in The Godfather, a part Sinatra desperately wanted. Brando won his second Oscar for it, while Sinatra could only watch from a distance. Others say that Sinatra's bitterness after Guys and Dolls drove him to create Ocean's 11 in 1960, a film full of swagger and charm, but starring only his friends from the Rat Pack, not Brando. Rumors even spread that their rivalry turned dangerous. Brando once claimed he was threatened by men linked to Sinatra's circle, though no one ever proved it. Whether those tales were true or exaggerated, they added to the myth of their feud. What's certain is that both men represented two very different Hollywood worlds. the old school of charisma and control, versus the new world of realism and emotion. Their clash symbolized a turning point in film history, where music, acting, and ego collided. And it all began with one musical, one casting decision, and one unforgettable slice of cheesecake. Nearly 70 years later, Guys and Dolls remains a Hollywood classic. The bright sets, the colorful costumes, and the lively songs still make it one of the most loved musicals of the 1950s. Yet behind its cheerful surface lies the story of two men whose pride nearly tore it apart. While audiences were dazzled by the glamour and comedy of Guys and Dolls, very few knew how tense things had truly become behind the curtains. The cast and crew often found themselves trapped between the two giants, unsure whose side to take. Vivian Blaine, who reprised her Broadway role as Adelaide, tried to keep peace on the set. She once said in an interview that every day felt like walking on eggshells. If someone laughed too hard at Brando's jokes, Sinatra would glare at them. If anyone complimented Sinatra's singing, Brando would quietly roll his eyes. Even lunch breaks turned into silent battlegrounds, with the two men sitting at opposite ends of the studio cafeteria, each surrounded by their loyal followers. Frank Lesser, the songwriter who had crafted the music for Guys and Dolls, became frustrated when Brando struggled with pitch. Lesser tried to coach him personally, but after several days, he gave up in exhaustion. In one letter, he even called Brando's singing an assault on the ears. Sinatra loved hearing that. He would hum Brando's songs off-key during breaks, just to make people laugh. The mockery got so bad that Brando stopped attending some rehearsals, preferring to record alone. It was clear by then that this film had become more about personal pride than art. Still, the studio couldn't afford for either star to quit, not when millions of dollars and Hollywood Bruth's reputation were on the line, as the feud worsened. Producer Samuel Goldwyn had to play the role of peacemaker. Goldwyn knew that firing either actor would destroy the movie, but keeping both was like holding a lit match near gasoline. So he came up with a quiet plan. He began scheduling scenes so that Sinatra and Brando rarely had to film together. When they did, he kept their call times separate by at least 2 hours. Mankiewicz, the director, cleverly used editing tricks, cutting between close-ups, reaction shots, and over-their-shoulder angles, to make it look like the two men were facing each other, when, in truth, they weren't even in the same room. Goldwyn also doubled the number of assistants on set to monitor the stars' tempers. One assistant's only job was to keep Sinatra's whiskey glass full to calm him down. Another made sure Brando's dressing room stayed locked so no one could provoke him. The studio even had a cool-off room where either actor could retreat if an argument broke out. That's how intense things had become. Yet, despite the chaos, Goldwyn refused to let the press see the cracks. Whenever reporters visited the set, everyone was ordered to smile. Publicly, both men praised each other, but everyone could tell the compliments were fake. Behind those smiles, the hatred was growing sharper with every passing week. There's one particularly fascinating piece of Guys and Dolls history that few people know. The scene Sinatra refused to film entirely. According to old production notes, a deleted sequence was written in which Sky Masterson Brando humiliates Nathan Detroit Sinatra by winning a big bet in front of Sarah Brown and Adelaide. It was supposed to be a comedic moment, showing Nathan's frustration and Sky's charm. But Sinatra saw it differently. He believed the scene made his character look weak, like a fool next to Brando. He told Mankiewicz flatly, "I'm not doing it." At first, the director tried to convince him. He explained that the scene added humor and kept the story balanced. But Sinatra didn't care. He accused Brando of having the scene added just to make himself look better. He even threatened to walk off the film unless the sequence was cut. Goldwyn, terrified of losing his biggest star, agreed to remove it. That's how the so-called missing scene vanished from the final movie. Years later, when film historians found the old script pages, they finally confirmed what had happened. Sinatra's refusal wasn't about artistic disagreement, it was pure rivalry. He simply didn't want to appear defeated by Brando, not even in fiction. That moment perfectly captured the mindset of the two men. both obsessed with winning, both too proud to compromise. For the rest of the cast, working under that tension was like living in a pressure cooker.